The Underworld armament allowed the Mantle to accommodate and augment a charm memory, channeling its enchantment as if it was inherent to the armor itself. That alone made the Mantle of the Underworld incredibly flexible. What was more, this quality truly shined when wielded by Sunny. He could have augmented the broken oath with his 4 shadows, but chose to wrap them around his armor instead, achieving an even better result. Not only was the effect of the augmentation shared and enhanced, but all the other enchantments of the Mantle of the Underworld were augmented as well. Among them was Stalwart, which granted him extremely high protection against physical attacks, high protection against elemental attacks, and, most importantly, a moderate amount of protection against mind and soul attacks. Currently, the Mantle was simultaneously radiating a tremendously damaging soul-annihilation aura and providing him with vastly increased resistance to soul damage. Even then, when 5 of these auras clashed and combined together, he let out a scream and collapsed to the ground, consumed by harrowing agony. His already wounded soul was being frayed and eroded at a terrible rate, and all he could do was writhe on the ground, barely clinging to any resemblance of consciousness. The 5 reflections were not doing much better. Even though their ascended souls, or whatever it was they had instead of souls, possessed a far better quality due to a superior rank, they had fewer cores. While that was not enough to make them succumb to soul annihilation faster than Sunny by itself, that also meant that they had fewer shadows, and therefore their reflected versions of the Mantle enjoyed less augmentation, providing them with less resistance to soul damage. What it all meant, Sunny had no idea. He could not guess who was going to be destroyed first, the reflections or him. As far as he could tell, their chances were about equal. However, things were very different when it came to Mordret. Unlike Sunny and the reflections, he did not enjoy the protection of the Mantle of the Underworld. He was also only able to steal the aspect of the body he possessed, while his own strange and terrible ability to mirror someone's powers only worked inside the victim's soul. He could not simply copy the onyx armor onto himself, nor could he augment it. For the moment, Mordret was defenseless. With a startled yelp, the old man awkwardly fell to his knees and then rolled down the steps, ending up on the ground not too far away from Sunny. A stifled howl escaped from his lips, and his eyes opened wide, full of shock and terrible pain. The suffering Sunny and the reflections experienced affected him so much worse. Any other awakened would have been swiftly destroyed, but the Prince of Nothing persisted somehow. Several swirls of sparks instantly appeared around his body, heralding the appearance of protective memories. Who knew how vast and powerful his soul arsenal was? Mordret could have possessed a memory capable of turning the tide of events completely, but very few memories were capable of manifesting themselves instantly. Most took several precious seconds to appear, and usually, the more powerful ones took the longest. By the time the sparks of light turned into tangible objects, he could have been either already dead or too severely damaged to be able to act. Writhing in agony, Sunny threw a burning look at the old man and gritted his teeth so hard that his fangs pierced his lip, sending drops of blood rolling down. Die! Die, you bastard! Just hurry up and die. A desperate hope that Mordret would fail to survive the soul annihilation filled his hearts, despite the fact that Sunny did not really think that getting rid of the prince would be so easy. He seriously doubted that Mordret would allow himself to be killed in this fashion. Not to mention that as far as he knew, the Prince of Nothing was as immortal as the cursed transcendence of the Kingdom of Hope. Both his physical and spirit bodies had been destroyed in the past, but that did not stop Mordret from continuing to exist somehow. The great clan Valor certainly did not lack means of dealing soul damage, but they had failed to get rid of his reflection. I don't care, just die. Sunny would have been satisfied with just destroying Mordret's mortal shell. Anyway, his true task was to buy Kai enough time to kill the ivory dragon, and forcing the prince to search for another body would do just that. Sadly, Mordret had the same idea. If he had lost all reason because of the pain, things could have turned differently, but the Prince of Nothing was nothing if not cool-headed and calculating. Despite the terrible suffering of having his soul slowly torn to pieces, he kept some of his composure and ability to think intact. Twisting, Mordret struggled to raise his head and looked in the direction of one of the reflections. The shadow spawn was on his knees, his bestial face contorted by a grimace of agony. The Prince of Nothing paled and then whispered something. A moment later, the figure of the kneeling devil rippled and shattered like a piece of glass. Something swift and intangible moved through the air and entered Mordret's body. Then, another reflection shattered, and then another, and then another. In an instant, 4 of the 5, both beasts and both monsters, were gone, leaving a lone demon behind. As they disappeared, the components of the soul-annihilating field disappeared as well. Only Sunny's own augmented aura was left to spread the invisible poison. He let out a trembling sigh of relief and then dismissed the broken oath entirely. Almost at the same time, a silver bracelet, a necklace made of strange black pearls, and a bone scepter appeared on Mordret's body and in his hand. Each of the memories, without a doubt, provided him with a degree of soul protection. But by now, they were of no use. With his soul in shambles and barely keeping itself together, Sunny remained laying on the ground. He groaned, and then threw a tired glance at his enemy. The flood of soul essence he was sending into the shadow lantern had run dry, and the sunlight finally prevailed, dismantling the dome of shadows that surrounded them. Mordret looked different somehow. The old man's body remained the same, but now a subtle sensation of immense, turbulent power emanated from it, as if Sunny was facing a titan instead of a man. No way could it be. 2 monsters and 2 beasts. Between the 4 of them, they had shared 6 soul cores. Had Mordret not dismissed the reflections, but actually absorbed them in order to strengthen his soul and survive the powerful attack? How did it even work? How could an awakened absorb ascended cores? Would they weaken, or would all that excess power rip his soul to shreds from the inside? Sunny did not know. All he knew was that he was utterly beaten and spent, and there was an ascended demon and an awakened titan in the guise of an old man in front of him, wrath burning in their eyes. But that did not matter, because at that moment, an inhuman, pained cry rolled across the empty expanse of the empty void and reached their ears. It was the voice of the ivory dragon Severax, his dying breath. If you are enjoying this journey through shadow and sunlight, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episode. Now, let us return to the story. While Sunny and Mordret struggled to survive as their souls were being destroyed, a human figure emerged from the darkness of the sky below and shot into the sunlight, flying with incredible speed. It was a man with skin that looked like polished bark and a burned, disfigured face. His armor was battered and painted dull by dried blood, and the quiver attached to his belt was long empty. The man had been an officer of the Sun Legion once, but now he returned to kill its commander. His eyes were full of resolve. Months had passed since the terrible day when Kai and his most brave soldiers were chained to the white cliff on the Sacrifice Island and left there to be devoured by the ivory dragon. Who could have thought that he would be back to this cursed place so soon? Leaving the heat of the burning city behind, Kai had hidden himself under the island where his comrades were turned to ash by the dragon's flame, waited for Sunny to get the full attention of the Prince of Valor, and then dashed forward without looking back. He did not wish to see the white cliff and the soot-covered chains hanging from its surface ever again. Flying under the last bridge connecting the rest of the city to the Ivory Island, he avoided being noticed too soon and then ascended into the sunlight. Behind him, a dome of shadows suddenly appeared at the entrance to the bridge, hiding his friend from sight. With his heart growing heavy, Kai soared above the emerald grass of the Ivory City and finally saw his goal. A magnificent dragon was laying on the ground, blood streaming from his mangled neck. His white scales were painted crimson and one of his wings was broken. But the great beast was still alive. He was still breathing. He was immortal after all. But not for long. In his hand, Kai held a knife made of ghostly glass. Inside the knife, the dragon's fate was sealed, placed there by a ruthless god. Was Kai breaking the will of the gods by delivering it back to its owner, or completing their design? He did not know and he did not care. All he cared about was killing the dragon. Kai had never been very strong or very brave or very smart. It took him a long time to grow a little. He was not a person of great conviction either, But if there was one thing he believed, it was that Severax had to die and that his ghastly reign had to end. The beautiful city he ruled was just too vile. Gritting his teeth, Kai ignored the pain that had tormented him for months and lunged at the gargantuan form of the dragon. The glass knife glistened in his hand. But even terribly wounded, the immortal transcendent was still immensely powerful and deadly. How could a mere awakened ever hope to wound him? Before Kai could thrust the ghostly blade into the exposed flesh on the great beast's neck, Severax suddenly stirred. His eyelids flew up, revealing inhuman amber eyes. His maw opened slightly, wisps of smoke escaping it. The dragon moved his healthy wing, and a torrent of wind crashed into Kai, sending him spinning. The glass knife scratched uselessly against impenetrable scales, and he was thrown away. A moment later, a giant claw brushed across his chest. The young man dashed away in time to avoid being killed, but just this light touch was enough to rip his breastplate open and shatter a few of his ribs. With a groan, Kai fell on the soft grass. His speed was so great that his body slid for a few dozen meters, and by the time he rose shakily to his knees, the dragon was already looking at him, ready to attack. A hint of confusion surfaced from the ocean of madness hidden in his eyes. Severax lingered for a moment, and then a low, tired, sonorous voice resounded from all around them. I know you." Kai gritted his teeth. His surprise attack had failed. He failed. Now that the Transcendent was aware of him, there was little chance of delivering the fateful strike. No matter how wounded and exhausted the Ivory Lord was, he would still be immeasurably faster, stronger, and more powerful than an awakened with a weak aspect. He would crush Kai in an instant. The immortal was not going to die. Hope was not going to escape. The nightmare was not going to end. His friends would not be saved. Kai might have been able to fly through the sky and see far and wide. He was no dragon. The man with a disfigured face looked at the immortal beast towering in front of him. He shook slightly and then lowered his head. And then he lunged forward, sending bits of torn grass into the air. He was fast, incredibly fast. But Severax was faster. The great beast twisted his neck, protecting the wound left on it by the fangs of the beast of twilight, and then opened his maw to crush the small human between his jaws. Perhaps Kai could have dodged. But he didn't. Instead, he accelerated even more and flew straight into the dragon's maw, which instantly closed, giant fangs striking against each other with a deafening sound. Just like that, the crippled man was gone. The dragon froze for a moment, stunned by the little human's unflinching bravery. Then he suddenly shuddered and let out a tortured cry. Kai, who had plunged the glass knife into the soft flesh of the great beast's tongue, was thrown back and crashed heavily onto the ground. His bark-like skin was smoldering, scorched once again by the heat of the dragon's flame. His armor was disintegrating, and the Ivory Lord, meanwhile, was becoming mortal again. Now that his fate had been returned to him, the terrible wound on his neck was sapping him of life. A few seconds more and it was going to kill him. But no, not yet. As a long, sorrowful cry of the great beast echoed across the burning city, Severax stubbornly refused to die. Straining his battered body, he slowly crawled forward, desperately trying to reach the ivory tower, which he had sworn to protect. Leaving a trail of blood behind, the beautiful white dragon tortuously wrapped his body around the great pagoda and tiredly lowered his head to the ground in front of its gates. His eyes slowly closed. It was his duty, to protect it. He was going to it, even in death, he promised. Laying on the soft grass in the middle of a burning inferno, the dragon let out a soft breath. He imagined a different picture. A picture of a beautiful white city, its streets bathing in gentle sunlight, full of happy and kind people, thriving, peaceful, and safe. A few moments later, Severax, the blessed of the sun, was dead. As the ivory dragon died, an invisible ripple spread through the world. The whole city trembled slightly, and then one of the two remaining chains that bound the ivory island to the rest of Hope's shattered kingdom broke with a deafening ring. The broken chain fell into the darkness of the sky below, leaving only a single tether holding the island in place. The island's position shifted, not by much, but enough to cause the arching stone bridge to crack, shudder, and then slowly crumble. A cloud of stone dust rose into the air as the massive structure collapsed, enveloping the patch of grass where Sunny and Mordret lay, still reeling from the deadly soul attack. Sunny coughed and waved his hand in front of his face, weakly trying to chase the dust away. Damnation! The Prince of Nothing, meanwhile, was slowly rising to his feet. With a stagger, he regained his footing and looked in the direction of the ivory tower, his old face growing dim. Mordret remained silent for a while and then said evenly, "Well, that is a bit unfortunate." Sunny let out a hoarse laugh, causing the old man to turn around and glance at him darkly. Then he tried to sit up but failed. The Prince of Nothing scoffed, "Drop the act, Sunless. I know you are not that weakened." Sunny cursed, then stopped pretending and sat up with a groan. He was indeed in a very bad shape, drained of essence and barely alive because of how severely damaged his soul was. However, he was indeed not as weak as he had wanted to mislead Mordred into believing. The old man shook his head, then smiled. "Using my own reflections against me. How clever. I expected something like that from you." Then his face abruptly grew dark, and he gazed in the direction of the ivory tower once again. His voice sounded quiet and uncertain. "That, however, that I did not expect at all. It should not have been possible. I don't understand. Giving one of the knives away is not in your nature. With how cynical and distrustful you are, you should have clung to them to the end. How did I make this mistake?" Sunny grinned. "I guess I've changed." Mordret frowned, then slowly shook his head. "People don't change that easily." The grin on Sunny's face became a little brittle. It wasn't easy. The old man remained motionless for a while, then sighed heavily and turned around to face him. At the same time, his remaining reflection did the same. The Prince of Nothing stared at the battered shadow devil for a few moments, then said amiably, "Sunless, my friend, please give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you." Sunny blinked a couple of times, then answered with a dark smile. "In case you didn't notice, people who try to kill me tend to end up dead instead." Mordret grinned dangerously. "I am sure I can manage." "Well, crap, I'm a bit sure myself." He tilted his head, then said doubtfully, "Because I still have the divine memory you want to get your hands on." The old man took a step forward, causing the reflection to do the same. Normally, that would have been a good reason. But right now, to be honest, Sunless, I am starting to wonder if it's worth the effort. Sunny lingered for a bit, then raised an eyebrow. "Pretty please." The Prince of Nothing laughed. "Not good enough." Sunny stared at him, slowly circulating what little essence he had left through his body. His shadows were damaged and restoring themselves in the nurturing black flames of his soul. His strength was depleted. His allies were far away and in even worse shape than him. Things were looking bleak. He sighed, and then said in a neutral tone, "Look, sure, you can probably kill me, but make no mistake, I won't make it easy for you. More importantly, I'll make sure to resist for a long, long time." Mordret smiled politely. "So far, I am liking everything that I am hearing." Sunny grinned. "Aren't you forgetting something?" The Prince of Nothing lingered for a moment, then frowned. "And what might that be?" Climbing back onto his chair, Sunny leaned on the backrest and let out a relieved sigh. Then he pointed at the ivory tower. "This nightmare is coming to the end. There's not much time left until we are returned to the real world. Precious time that you are going to waste trying to get rid of me." Mordret looked at him with a dark expression. "That is all right. My schedule is suddenly free anyway. What else is there to do?" Sunny shook his head. "You might have lost the opportunity to kill the demon of desire, but have you forgotten about the demon of destiny? There is a whole ebony tower beneath us, free for the plunder." The old man's frown deepened. "The divine flames are much more intense and plentiful during this time. The rift in them can't be traversed by the likes of us. Not that there's enough time to anyway, unless..." His expression suddenly changed. Sunny nodded. Indeed, the sky below cannot be traversed, but we just happen to be near the Ivory Island and the portal that stands behind the tower. Now, you can waste time trying to kill me, or you can try to pour enough divine flame into it and get your hands on all the toys left behind by Nether. Just don't be an idiot like me and let the time catch up to them after the seal is broken. Mordret stared at him for a few moments and then grinned. You are just hoping that the strange rot inside the ebony tower is going to devour me, aren't you? After all, it is not as starved yet in this time. Sunny coughed. Guilty as charged. Still, are you planning to kill a sovereign without taking a risk from time to time? Hurry up and decide. The clock is ticking. The old man studied him for a while, not saying anything. Gradually, Sunny grew extremely uncomfortable under that gaze. Damned bastard! Your desire to kill me can't be stronger than your desire to take revenge on Clan Valor. Hope, do your thing. Come on. Eventually, Mordret chuckled, shook his head, and said, 2 sovereigns. Sunny raised an eyebrow. What? The old man turned around and headed to the edge of the island, followed by his reflection. 2 sovereigns. I plan to kill Asterion too, although that will probably be much, much harder than dealing with my father. Still, I am as good at remembering grudges as you are sunless, so pray that we never meet again. He stopped near the very edge of the empty abyss of the sky below, lingered at it for a few moments, and then said somberly, Although who will hear your prayers? The gods are dead. With that, the Prince of Nothing stepped into the darkness and disappeared, taking his reflection with him. Sunny was left alone on the empty island, struggling to believe that he actually survived. He looked down at his exquisite wooden chair, then at the rock in his hand. Then he let out a shaky breath. Damn, I can't believe that worked. For a few moments, Sunny remained motionless, staring at the beautiful ivory walls of the great pagoda that towered above the world. Although the whole city was being consumed by immolating flame here at its precipice, everything was calm and quiet. He couldn't quite believe it. Solving, the Saint of War, was dead. The immortal prince encased in the mountain of moving steel was dead. The noble dragon that had dutifully guarded the tower was dead as well. They won. The nightmare was conquered, more or less. From the blood-soaked arena of the Red Colosseum, to the never-ending prison of nightmares, to the numinous temple of the chalice, to the furious battle for the sky above the Ivory City, to confronting the Prince of Nothing. Somehow, he had lived through all of it and triumphed. What were the chances of that? Just 5 months, but it felt like a lifetime. Of course, there were a few issues left. Most of the army of the perished Chain Lords was still intact and on its way to the city. The cohort had dealt a terrible blow to the small part of it, but hundreds upon hundreds of flying ships still remained, carrying thousands upon thousands of soldiers. Now that their commanders were dead, he was not sure what would happen to them and how they would react. Noctis was nowhere to be found, and hope was still chained, even if not for long now. With a sigh, Sunny stood up and grimaced as a feeling of sickening weakness overwhelmed him. His soul was terribly damaged. He had never abused it to this degree before, not even during the siege of the Crimson Spire. His body was not doing too great either. Sunny had given his all to come this far, and now he was at the end of his rope. But he was also so close to becoming a master. Slowly walking to the edge of the island, he looked into the darkness of the sky below for a few moments, summoned the Dark Wing, and then glided down to the last remaining chain holding the Ivory Island in place. There was not enough essence left in his soul to turn into a swift shadow, and he was too tired to run, so Sunny simply walked forward, using his enchanted cloak to scale the uneven links of the heavenly chain from time to time. It took him a while to traverse the wide chasm of emptiness and climb to the surface of the familiar tranquil island. The Emerald Meadow. The calm surface of a clear lake, the peaceful grove of ancient trees. He had been here before in the distant future. Of course now, the island did not look exactly the same. There were pools of dragon blood sizzling in the green grass and wisps of smoke floating in the air brought over from the burning city by the wind. He looked at the ivory tower and saw the body of a beautiful white dragon wrapped around it. not yet reduced to weathered bones. Sunny remained motionless for a bit, and then went to find Kai. The young man was laying on the grass not too far away, unconscious. His armor had melted and disintegrated, and his bark-like skin seemed damaged and scorched. Many of his bones were broken, and his disfigured face was contorted by a grimace of pain. But he was alive. After checking on his friend, Sunny came to the conclusion that Kai's life was not in danger. His wounds, while serious, were not enough to kill an awakened, at least not in a short time. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud, rolled it, and placed the soft fabric under the archer's head as a pillow. Then he lingered for a few moments, patted Kai on the shoulder, and stood up. Then he slowly walked forward and stood in front of the dead dragon's head, looking at the closed gates behind it. This was it, the prison of hope. As he studied the gates, something suddenly rustled behind him. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments and then slowly turned around. His eyes were dark and hollow. Noctis did not look as bad as he had after the battle with Solving, but he also did not look good. The sorcerer was battered and beaten, his body covered by terrible burns. His elegant garments had turned into rags, and his raven-black hair was singed and uneven. He also looked different. It was as though the burden of madness that had clouded his beautiful gray eyes finally disappeared, leaving them sparkling and clear. The sorcerer looked radiant and at ease, emanating a cool and calming aura. His friendly presence enveloped Sunny like an embrace. Perhaps this was how he had been centuries ago, before the duty of being a shackle to desire turned him twisted and weighed down by the curse of eternal servitude. Noctis glanced up at the ivory expanse of the great pagoda, and then looked at Sunny with a smile. "Ah, Sunless, please excuse my disheveled appearance. Looks like we've won, doesn't it?" Sunny lingered for a few moments, then offered him a silent nod. After that, he faced the sorcerer and asked, "So what now? This is it. We are done." Noctis remained silent for a bit, then lightly shook his head. "Well, actually, there is one small thing left to do." A crooked smile appeared on Sunny's face, and he looked away, hiding his eyes from the sorcerer. His voice resounded from the extraordinary rock, tinged with a bitter emotion. "I thought you said that she can break one chain on her own." Noctis smiled. "Oh, I think that she can, however." The immortal's smile paled and then disappeared, leaving his face strangely bare. "That doesn't mean that she should." He sighed and then looked away at the pillars of smoke rising above the dying city. His gaze was distant and solemn. Have you ever seen a wolf gnaw its paw off to escape a trap, Sunless? Ah, it's a terrible thing to behold. I wouldn't wish such a fate on anyone. Noctis remained silent for a while, and then added in a wistful tone, "Wolves are meant to be free." Then a carefree smile appeared on his beautiful face once again, and the sorcerer turned to Sunny with sparks dancing in his gray eyes. "So, my friend, the time has finally come for me to request something of you." He reached out with his hand and opened his palm. Sunny remained silent, refusing to look in the sorcerer's direction. "Will you give me the obsidian knife?" "Goddammit." Sunny wanted to say so much. He wanted to do so much. He felt so much. But he knew that it would have been a wrong and cruel thing to do, a betrayal. He sighed heavily and then faced Noctis. A swirl of sparks appeared around his hand. "I have never seen a real wolf, you know. And yes, I will, since you asked nicely." He opened the lid of the covetous coffer, rummaged inside, and then placed the knife cut from a single piece of obsidian in the sorcerer's hand. Noctis received it and then calmly looked at the black blade. His fingers slowly closed around the handle. A sad smile appeared on his face. "Well then, I guess this is a goodbye. Farewell, Sunless. You have been a great friend to me, and I hope that I have been a good friend to you too." He sighed, lingered for a few moments, and then added, "Before we part, however, I must tell you something." Sunny looked at him darkly and asked in a hoarse voice, "What?" Noctis silently shook his head. You really should stop wearing all black. What a terribly drab color. Ah, Sunless, "You are better than this." With that, the sorcerer laughed and took a step forward. He hesitated for a second, then locked Sunny in a hug. Because of the difference in their heights, Sunny had to bend down a little. Noctis chuckled, then grew silent for a moment. Then he sighed and whispered, his voice suddenly low and somber. Just 4 words, each carrying immeasurable weight. "Never trust the gods." Then the sorcerer let go of Sunny, smiled one last time and walked away. Soon he disappeared from sight. And not too long after that, the ivory island trembled slightly as the last chain holding it in place broke apart. Sunny gritted his teeth, then looked away and wiped his eyes. His shoulders fell. "Damn scoundrel, you tricked me again." Sunny stood motionless for a while, feeling the ground move beneath him. Now that all 7 of the chains were broken and the ivory tower became completely untethered from the rest of the Kingdom of Hope, it started to ascend. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, the island it stood upon soared into the sky, leaving the shattered land behind. And as it did, Sunny felt the nightmare coming to the end. Slowly, he walked to the edge and looked down at the burning city below. The beautiful buildings of white stone were melting. The aerial bridges and elegant aqueducts were collapsing, unable to withstand the terrible heat. The streams of clear water were turning into scalding steam. All around he could see nothing but an ocean of flame. The wind brought with it the distant sound of human cries, smoke, and the smell of burning flesh. Thousands of people, those who still lived, were drowning in the fiery ocean, turning into piles of blackened bones and ash. The ivory city was dying. Was this what salvation looked like? In the thousands of years to come, the scorched islands were going to crumble into the sky below one after another, forming the tier. The twisted rock would eventually be the last one to fall. As the ivory tower rose higher and higher, the sight of the dying city did not encompass all of Sunny's vision anymore. Now, he saw further and wider. The landscape of the Kingdom of Hope was laid bare in front of him. He saw the shape of a giant steel corpse swinging below a faraway island on a broken chain, and a shape of a shattered ship laying on the ground. Effie and Cassie were somewhere there as well, but the distance was too great for Sunny to see them. He saw countless islands, some of them verdant and green, some of them gray and desolate. There were forests and lakes, rivers and hills, human settlements, small and large. He saw people, cattle, beasts, and nightmare creatures. He saw the chains stretching into the distance as they connected the islands together. Looking up from the ground, Sunny saw numerous flying ships rushing toward the burning city. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, some with white sails, some with red. The army of the fallen chain lords had arrived. As the ivory island rose even higher, the sky around it started to change. The change was subtle at the beginning, but as the ivory tower continued to ascend, it became more and more pronounced. The invisible power that held the flying islands above the abyss of the sky below was shifting. As its heart climbed higher and higher, it was slowly becoming more and more overbearing. The giant enchantment was losing its balance. Sunny shivered as he realized what was happening. The crushing. The crushing was coming to the chained isles for the first time. As he watched, it descended upon the shattered remains of the Kingdom of Hope in all its vicious might. Across numerous islands, dust suddenly rose into the air. Ancient forests were flattened in an instant. Tall hills broke apart, rivers boiled and changed their course, settlements were turned into ruins. Countless humans, beasts, and nightmare creatures were cruelly killed, not knowing what had killed them. The flying ships were hit the hardest, every one of them instantly turning into a cloud of splinters, debris, and broken bodies. The mighty army was gone in a second. The scale of the destruction was too large to comprehend. Sunny watched as the Kingdom of Hope was turned into the chained isles, paralyzed by the inconceivable horror of that sight. For a while, all thoughts disappeared from his head. Then suddenly, his eyes widened. Cassie, Effie. For a moment, he was consumed by fear, but then his heart slowly calmed. No, they were all right. Cassie had always been good at predicting when the islands would enter the crushing back in the future. She would have warned Effie if they were in danger and taken them both to safety. Sunny sighed with relief. Now that his paralysis was broken, however, another thought suddenly entered his mind. He took an uncertain step back from the edge, then turned around and ran to the center of the island. Approaching the dead dragon, he hurriedly climbed over the beast's massive head and jumped down, landing near the gates of the ivory tower. The ancient doors were closed shut, as though no one had opened them in 1,000 years. Sonny gritted his teeth and pulled, putting the strength of all his shadows into it. Hope. He had to see hope. Succumbing to the pressure, the gates slowly moved. Tortuously slowly, one side of them slid forward, creating an opening. Not wasting any more time, he pushed himself into the narrow gap and entered the ivory tower. Soon, he saw the familiar Great Hall, its vast expanse bathed in light that streamed through tall windows. 7 chains sprawled from the pristine white floor as though growing out of it, each ending in a broken shackle. The shackles were bleak and marred, their metal torn. There was fresh blood on the broken shackles, suffused with a radiant golden glow, and between them, Sonny staggered and involuntarily fell to his knees. Every passion, every desire, every emotion dwelling in his heart suddenly surged forward and ignited, breaking out of control. In the center of the great hall, surrounded by a swirling hurricane of light and darkness, a vague and graceful silhouette towered above the broken chains. He couldn't quite tell where the light ended and where her numinous body began. Perhaps Hope had no body at all, and was instead made of pure radiance. Pure darkness. He felt as though her nebulous visage was almost human-like, but also inexplicably alien. The shapes and contours were both correct and wrong, both familiar and strange, both pleasing and revolting, and beautiful, so beautiful. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. She was divine, unholy, unknown, unknowable, a demon, and she was leaving. Sonny couldn't see much, but he clearly understood that Hope was ready to disappear. Maybe she was already half gone and all he saw was an afterimage, and yet he had to. His mind was scattered and empty, and he didn't quite remember what he wanted to do, what he desired. Sonny gritted his teeth, and then screamed, letting his desire dictate the question.
Don't go, tell me why the Lord of Light did this. Why did the gods imprison you? Why couldn't they just kill you? Why?
The demon of desire paid him no attention. For a moment, Sonny thought that he would not receive an answer. But then something changed. Hope moved and was suddenly beside him. Her face, which was weaved of light and darkness, encompassed the whole world. Her radiant eyes peered into the deepest, most hidden parts of his soul. And then a voice that sounded like the rustle of countless leaves, like a myriad of prayers, like the wind that blew between the stars whispered into his ear. Because we are their flaw. Sonny's eyes grew wide, and then everything became dark. The nightmare was over.
Your nightmare is over. Prepare for appraisal.
Once again, Sonny found himself in the space between dream and reality. The boundless black void was illuminated by a myriad of stars, with countless strings of silver light connecting them together to form an infinite, beautiful pattern. Now that he had a nascent understanding of sorcery, Sonny saw the pattern differently. His old suspicions grew stronger, slowly turning into a certainty. This was the inner sanctum of the spell, and if the spell had been created by Weaver, then what he was looking at was its weave. The myriad of stars were the nexuses. The strings of light, however, were not the same as the threads of essence he could create himself. Instead, the spell was weaved from the strings of fate itself. As that realization took root in his heart, Sonny shuddered. The scale of the cosmic weave of silver light and numerous stars that surrounded him had already been too vast to comprehend. Now that he glimpsed its true nature, it suddenly seemed even more inconceivable. Yes, Weaver was called the demon of fate, but harvesting its very fabric to create a titanic enchantment was too incredible, even for the firstborn of the unknown, for a demon. Sonny shivered once again. We are their flaw. What did she mean? Hope's answer had shaken him to the very core. The implications were too unthinkable. He did not truly understand what she had meant, but felt as though he was at the precipice of a vast and terrible truth. Sonny was still far away from grasping that truth, however. Were the demons personifications of the flaws that the gods had shed? Is that how the gods had become flawless? Or had the gods been flawless before the demons appeared instead? None of it made any sense. How did the unknown from whom the demons had come fit into this? Was there a hint at who or what the unknown had been, or was? As always, there were too many questions and almost no answers. If there was one thing that became clear, however, it was that the relationship between the gods and the demons was even more complicated than he had thought. How infuriating. Sonny had learned a remarkable secret, but had no way to understand it. He stared into the distance for some time, then sighed. Well, whatever. I am too small and weak to concern myself with the secrets of the divine anyway. Although he was not as small and weak as he had been before, he was a master. Or rather, was about to become one. As if answering his thoughts, the spell finally spoke. Awakened, your trial is over.
Awakened, your trial is over.
Its voice continued to resonate in the black void.
A lonesome shadow came to a land of shattered dreams. It was captured and thrown into a cage, but escaped by weaving sorceries from its own soul. The shadow beheaded itself to take the slave collar off its neck and lost its heart to win its freedom. Leaving the Colosseum behind, the shadow traveled far and got ensnared. It lived 100 lives and died 100 deaths within a dreadful nightmare, forgetting what it was and where it came from. The shadow did not break, and so the nightmare broke instead. Free once again, the shadow befriended a mad sorcerer, a feral child, a crippled archer, and a blind prophet. Together, they collected the deaths of the immortal lords and waged a war against the holy city. The lords were killed, the city was destroyed. The shadow broke the chains of hope and set desire free.
The spell went on to list everyone and everything he had killed inside the nightmare. Sonny felt that something strange was happening to time inside the black void, because it did not take too long for the spell to finish with that part of the appraisal, and there was a lot for it to list. Sonny had been busy in these past 5 months, after all. He had lost count at some point, but the number of his victims had to be somewhere between 1 and 2,000. He had slain 1,000 enemies at the Red Colosseum alone. A few of them stood out from the litany of names: the Red Priest, Nightmare, the 3 War Maidens, a few high-ranking officers of the Flying Fleet, Solving herself. That was the tally of his deeds. The spell was not shy about showering him with praise too. Of course, his most dangerous battle had been the battle of wits against Mordret. After a while, the spell was ready to pass a verdict.
You have slain and awakened. You have set free a demoness chained by a god. Your achievements are remarkable. Final appraisal, excellent.
With that, it grew silent. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then frowned. Wait, what? Excellent, just excellent. What the hell spell? It did not even bother to add a remark after the appraisal. He had killed hundreds upon hundreds of awakened humans and nightmare creatures, including plenty of fallen abominations and masters. He had even killed a saint. He had learned true sorcery, won a battle against a whole army, caused the deaths of several immortals, and set free a demon against a god's will. He had his head cut off and his heart ripped out, and still lived to tell the tale. Was it not enough to earn a better mark? Not that it mattered anyway. Unlike the first nightmare, the second did not come with an additional boon. Sonny already had a true name and an aspect legacy. All he was going to receive was the ascension, which was the only reward he truly cared about. But still, why was his performance in the first nightmare appraised as glorious, but his performance in the second nightmare as just excellent? Both achievements seemed equally improbable, but this one was without a doubt much more impressive. Suddenly, an idea entered his mind. Sonny's eyes widened. Can this be true? Sonny reeled from all the information he was receiving. He had already been exhausted after the battle against the Flying Armada, the race across the burning city, the confrontation with Mordret, and the rest. Witnessing Hope in her true form and hearing her inhuman, beautiful voice had almost overloaded his mind. Looking at the spell through the prism of his new knowledge of sorcery had been another shock. and this latest revelation. Sunny groaned. What does it all mean?
The third seal is broken, awakening dormant powers.
Sunny was about to ascend. Just as before, he felt as though something was waking up inside him. His 4 shadow cores ignited with intense heat, the power within them surging. The heat spread through his soul and his body, rejuvenating and changing them. The feeling was familiar and euphoric. He felt his body being reforged into a stronger, better, more perfect version of itself. His soul was going through the same sublime transformation. This process was already familiar to Sunny, since more or less the same thing had happened to him twice before. However, this time, something was different. Instead of stopping after reaching the threshold of qualitative change and immense fortification, the transformation continued. His body and soul, both turned incandescent and malleable by the furious heat flowing through them, started to melt into each other. They were slowly merging, but they were not simply joining into a single whole. Instead, the 2 parts of his being resonated with each other, reinforcing one another. The power of that resonance grew stronger and stronger, and then exploded once it reached his 4 cores. Under the influence of the resonance, the threshold was demolished, pushing him even further on the path of evolution. And as his body and soul became one, a profound change took place. Suddenly, Sunny felt the shadow essence coursing through every fiber of his being with stark clarity. The difference was so staggering that he almost yelped. The measure of control he could exert on his essence became incredibly precise and fine. Additionally, since his body and soul were now deeply interconnected, the effect of one on another also went through a fundamental change. He could do much more and with much less. This was the true boon of the ascension. And there was something else, a deep and vast shift in his very being that he could feel but not understand or express with words yet. All Sunny knew was that it had to do with his relation to the waking world, the dream realm, and his connection to both. Slowly, the heat suffusing his newly reforged self subsided and turned into a pleasant coldness. The coldness then disappeared, absorbed into his spirit, his flesh, and his bones. Sunny looked at the black void with new eyes. He felt powerful. He felt as though there was furious might boiling under his skin. He also felt calm and confident, balanced. As he listened to his body, the spell spoke from the darkness. Awakening aspect ability acquired.
Awakening aspect ability acquired.
Sunny held his breath. Aspect ability name, shadow manifestation. He clenched his fists. Is this what I think it is? However, to his surprise, the spell was not done speaking. Stunning Sunny, its voice resounded once again. Your attribute has evolved. Your aspect ability has evolved. The spell paused for a moment and then added solemnly. Your ascension is complete.
Your attribute has evolved. Your aspect ability has evolved. Your ascension is complete.
Sunny opened his eyes wide. What has evolved? He hurriedly summoned the runes and read them. Name Sunless, true name lost from light, rank ascended, class Devil, shadow cores 4-7, shadow fragments 744 4000. Sunny stared at the number of his fragments for a moment, then shook his head and skipped ahead to his attributes. Attributes faded, flame of divinity. He had expected the flame of divinity to transform once again, but it was the same. Neither did blood weave and bone weave change. Instead, Child of Shadows was gone. A new attribute had replaced it. Sunny stared at the runes. They read, Master of Shadows, what? He sucked in a deep breath, waited for a moment, and then concentrated on the shimmering symbols. Master of Shadows attribute description. Shadows recognize you as one of their champions. The first part was the same, but the second was new. Wait, does this mean that I command wild shadows now? He quickly concentrated on his abilities, looking for the one that had evolved. It was Shadow Control. Now its description read, Shadow Control ability description. Your shadows are more independent than most and are invaluable helpers. All shadows respect your authority. It does. The possibilities. If he could command natural shadows to move and change shapes according to his will, so many things would become easier. So many things would become possible. And that new and unexpected gift was going to, without a doubt, synergize not only with his familiar aspect abilities, but with his new one as well. Finally, Sunny moved his gaze and concentrated on his ascended ability. The runes shimmered in the darkness. Aspect ability, shadow manifestation. Ability description, you can manifest shadows as tangible objects. Sunny read the description several times over, then froze for a few moments. The visage of the Mountain King being torn apart by tentacles made of pure shadows appeared in his mind. After some time, Sunny threw his head back and let out a loud, triumphant laugh. As his laughter echoed in the darkness, the spell whispered into his ear, "Wake up, Sunless. Your nightmare is over."
And wake up, Sunless, your nightmare is over.
In a dark underground chamber, a metal sarcophagus stood shrouded in silence. Nothing had disturbed the silence and no light had penetrated the darkness in a long, long time. Until now. Suddenly, the sarcophagus came to life, and a scattering of lights ignited on its surface. A crack appeared on the smooth alloy surface, revealing where the edges of a heavy lid were. The lid smoothly slid away, and a flood of radiant light chased away the darkness of the underground chamber. Cold vapor shined as it rose from inside the sarcophagus. Then a pale hand rose from within it and forcefully grabbed the metal lip, easily bending its armored alloy. Sunny struggled to climb out of the sleeping pod for a few moments, then lowered his feet to the cool plates of the dojo's floor. A moment later, he swayed and fell down with a yelp. Damnation! Sunny remained sprawled on the floor for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened and why he suddenly lost balance. Then his eyes gleamed. Wait, I can speak again. I can speak again. A happy smile slowly appeared on his lips. Of course, he was back to being a human. He had returned to his own body. Trying to move like a towering demon was not going to do his sense of balance any good. With a mad grin, Sunny nimbly jumped to his feet and looked down, enjoying the sight of his slender, pale body. Then, he suddenly spun and performed several lightning-fast strikes and kicks. Ah, it is good to be home. He felt so light, so swift, so agile, but most of all, so himself. It was as though a giant weight fell from his shoulders, quite literally. The shadow spawn must have weighed 3 times what Sunny weighed. Being a tall, powerful devil had its own advantages, but he much preferred his true compact self. Not only was Sunny much lighter, but he also presented a much smaller target for the enemies to stick their blades in. And although having only 2 hands seemed rather inconvenient and silly, shedding the cumbersome shell of the inhuman creature felt nothing short of exhilarating. Besides, now that Sunny was a master, his slender body packed more punch than the shadow spawn could ever hope to muster. Not to mention how in tune it was with shadow essence now, and how explosive the result could be. At the moment, Sunny was incredibly happy with his natural stature and height. Only after being forcefully turned into a lumbering monstrosity did he learn to appreciate all the benefits of being light, nimble, and swift. Inhaling the flawlessly filtered air of the underground dojo, he let out a satisfied sigh and glanced at the crumpled metal of the lip of the sleeping pod. He had inadvertently damaged the armored alloy by simply grabbing it too hard. Getting used to his new strength was going to take some time. For a moment, Sunny felt very disheartened about the damage he had done to the expensive machine. Replacing the bent panel was not going to be cheap. It was well within his means, of course, but still. However, then, he tilted his head slightly. Wait, why do I even care? Why would he worry about the luxurious sleeping pod? He didn't need it anymore. He was a master now, a true ascended. If Sunny wished to enter the dream realm, he would travel there physically. His body would not be left empty and defenseless in the waking world. More than that, he could leave the dream realm behind forever. If he wanted to, he could never go back to that hell. He could just remain in the comfort and safety of the real world, enjoying all that it offered thanks to his wealth, citizenship, and social status. For the first time after becoming infected by the nightmare spell, Sonny was free to refuse it. He had won his right to have a choice. He was not a slave to the whims of the world anymore. For now, he could concentrate on his business and open a true memory shop, just like he had wanted. With his accumulated arsenal and knowledge of sorcery, creating a thriving enterprise would not be a problem. Sonny would be able to grow filthy rich and enjoy a lavish or even decadent lifestyle without having to risk his life or think about how to sustain it even again. He could even sleep in an actual bed and see actual dreams. Would it not be a beautifully happy ending for a homeless street rat from the outskirts? Sonny froze, staring into the distance. Slowly, a pale smile appeared on his face. Yeah, as if that would ever happen. Somehow, he doubted that extricating himself from the spell would be that easy. Even if he learned how to manage the unpredictable nature of his fated attribute, there were other factors to consider. As a master with a special strategic asset designation, he was bound to attract the utmost attention of the forces that governed humanity. Neither the government nor the great clans would leave him be, especially the latter. Sonny suspected that he was going to receive a friendly visit from a representative of one of the ruling clans in the near future. Thanks to subtle assistance from Master Jet, they had largely let him be when Sonny had been simply a promising awakened. Now that he proved his mettle and elevated himself to the venerated status of an ascended, the clans would not remain idle. At the very least, they had to pass on a message that trying to become a saint without pledging allegiance to one of them would not be tolerated. And then there was the whole mess with the Night Temple. Saint Tyrus had said that she would smooth things out with clan valor, but Sonny did not know how successful her attempts to shield him from the consequences of Mordret's escape had ended up being. Even though there were no witnesses left to tell the tale of what had transpired in the destroyed citadel, he was hesitant to assume that a great clan had no means of finding out the truth. And finally, there was Nephis. Even though Sonny was inclined to believe that Changing Star would not abuse her power over him, he could not be absolutely sure. Worse still, whatever certainty he had was based on Nephis he knew. Who could tell what years of solitude in the harrowing hell of the dream realm had done to her mind? Sonny looked down and then sighed. No, I'll still be rich and lazy one day no matter what. You will all see. His train of thought was interrupted, however, because in the next moment, the whole home suddenly shook and a strangely exhilarated howl resounded from somewhere above. Sonny flinched, then looked up with wide eyes. What the hell was that? Summoning the undying chain and the cruel sight, Sonny bypassed using either the elevator or the stairs and stepped through the shadows to leave the underground dojo behind. No matter what kind of an abomination had found its way into his home, the creature was going to regret it dearly. For a moment, however, Sonny felt a hint of hesitation. He did not know what had transpired in the waking world during his absence after all. He had left for the Night Temple 7 months ago and had not been back since. For all Sonny knew, humanity might have fallen in that time. The whole city could have been destroyed, with endless hordes of nightmare creatures stalking the desolate ruins. Any kind of horror could have been hiding in his living room.
Well, so what? It is still my living room.
No matter what state the waking world was in, anyone and anything thinking that they could simply make themselves at home in a home that belonged to Sonny would have to reconsider their life choices. Ready for battle, he appeared from the shadows and froze. The exhilarated howl grew much louder above ground, but it was not produced by a nightmare creature. Instead, it was produced by Effie, with beads of condensation still glistening on her olive skin. The huntress was standing in the center of the room and howling like a maniac. Behind her, the door of the guest bedroom was taken off the hinges, complete with a large piece of the wall and a chunk of the ceiling. Effie cursed loudly, swearing that the wall had been reinforced with armored alloy.
That wall was reinforced with armored alloy, damn it.
Sonny stared at his friend in shock, then slowly blinked. Wait, Effie is standing. Indeed, the young woman was standing tall, her long legs appearing healthy and strong. There was no wheelchair in sight. In fact, her whole appearance had changed. The weak, unhealthy girl with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a twisted spine was gone. Instead, Effie looked almost like she did in the dream realm. Tall, attractive, with sparkling hazel eyes and perfectly defined, lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin. She was radiating an infectious feeling of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was screaming of strength, potency, and power. The only thing that changed was the length and cut of her hair, as well as the degree of her tan. Before Sonny could realize it, a joyous smile crept up on his face. Of course, the ascension was a miraculous process. It merged the physical and the spirit bodies together, taking the best parts and perfecting both. Even the lost could return from the dream realm and live in the real world once more after conquering the second nightmare. Effie's disability was no exception to this magical rule. That was the reason why she had always strived to become a master to begin with. A moment later, Effie ended her triumphant howl on a high note and turned around, finally noticing him. Her eyes shined. She took a step forward and grinned brightly, calling him a doofus and shouting that she was walking. Sonny wanted to say something, but then forced himself to look away. He cleared his throat.
Congratulations. I am very happy for you. I am, but please, can you put something on?
Well, pretend you didn't see anything.
Hearing the young woman hurriedly stomp away, Sonny let out a heavy sigh and muttered that he would try. Effie's voice resounded from the guest bedroom, calling out his name. He turned his head slightly and asked what she needed. For a moment, there was silence, and then she apologized about the doors and the walls.
It's not a big, wait, walls, as in multiple walls. What the hell did you do?
While Effie was clothing herself, Sonny looked around his house. It didn't change much. In the 7 months that passed since his departure, the cleaning systems had done a good job of keeping everything presentable. If not for the broken door of the guest bedroom and the debris of the collapsed wall laying on the floor, he could have thought that he had left only yesterday. It was a strange feeling. So much had happened, so much had changed. He had changed most of all. He was a master now, and that was perhaps not the greatest transformation Sonny had gone through after living through the Night Temple and the nightmare. And yet, here in the waking world, everything was the same. Everything was unchanged. He did not know how to feel about it. The permanence and safety of his home were very comforting, but they also filled him with a deep sense of resentment for some reason. The contradiction persisted, making him feel confused, shaking his head. Sonny retrieved his communicator from where he had left it and turned it online. There was a backlog of unanswered messages he was going to have to go through, but right now, that did not matter. Only the last message caught his attention. It was from Cassie, containing only a couple of words. "I'm fine." He quickly sent a response, and then dialed Kai. His friend answered the call immediately, as if he was waiting for it. The charming young man was already dressed, although his gorgeous hair was wet and messy. In the background, multiple people in stylish business suits were feverishly running around with slightly shell-shocked looks on their faces. They were probably the representatives of his agency and PR team.
What happened? How did the nightmare end? Is everyone all right?
I am all right. Effie and Cassie are alive and well too. After you dealt with Severax, everything went smoothly.
Thank the gods, but what about? Actually, don't answer. I'll be there in 10 minutes.
The image on the screen of the communicator shifted and then cut off. The last thing Sonny heard was someone's voice yelping. "Mr. Knight, what are you? What do you mean, step away from the window?" Sonny lowered the communicator and smiled. A piece of the broken wall caught his eye laying on the kitchen table. Everything else was perfectly clean and spotless. As Sonny stared at the piece of debris with displeasure, a dark tentacle rose from below and easily swatted it to the floor. Usually, it would have taken Kai a lot longer to fly across the city to reach the Tranquil Terrace district. Not that he would have. But today, the famous idol neglected his habit of staying low and out of sight. It seemed that his speed increased tremendously as well because 10 minutes later he was already at Sunny's door. Maybe because of that, there was no crowd of paparazzi following him. As they waited for Cassie, Effie rummaged through the empty refrigerator, then walked away from it with a disappointed sigh, complaining that there was no food.
We've been gone for months. What did you expect?
Effie made a sad face, then shrugged and protested that she was hungry.
Well, I have some synth paste if you want.
She shuddered and opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment there was a knock on the door, if not for the haughty shadow standing guard outside. Reluctantly, of course, since mundane tasks such as this were grossly beneath it. Sunny would have tensed up. However, he already knew that it was Cassie. The blind girl walked inside, froze for a moment, then raised a deliciously smelling package and quietly announced that she had brought food. Effie threw a quick glance at Kai and grinned, declaring that someone had some sense. She did not stare at the archer for long, though. Kai had always been ridiculously charming, but after becoming a master, his looks assumed an almost hypnotizing quality. It was easy to get distracted if one stared at him for too long. In fact, every one of them became much better looking, albeit to a different degree. After studying Kai and Cassie for a bit, Sunny couldn't help but shake his head ruefully, a stunned expression on his face. He finally understood why Master Jet had called herself average when they first met, at least as far as Ascended went. Still, it felt wrong to put the word average in one sentence with someone like her. Jet possessed an intangible quality that no one he had ever met was able to match. The four of them were masters too now, but they were far away from matching her arresting presence. And Sunny himself. He wasn't sure that he qualified to be considered a flower boy, as Soul Reaper had once predicted, but even he couldn't call himself unassuming anymore. The scrawny kid from the outskirts was gone. Instead, a young man with porcelain skin and striking black eyes took his place. Deep in their darkness, visible only to Sunny himself, golden threads of Weaver's forbidden legacy glowed with the flame of divinity. The four of them settled around the table and shared a silent meal. Despite the fact that they should have been exhilarated by their triumph over the nightmare, none of the four seemed too joyous. Well, except for Effie, who couldn't stop grinning and stealing glances at her pristine, vigorous body. The huntress was overflowing with giddiness. The other three, however, just felt hurt, tired, and empty. And why wouldn't they be? Inside the nightmare, there was no time for weakness. They had to carry on no matter how deep the wounds dealt to their souls cut. Now that the danger had passed and the members of the cohort were back in the real world, all those invisible scars were starting to make their presence known. The slaughterhouse of the Red Colosseum, the nightmares, the assault on the Ivory City. All of it was slowly coming back to haunt Sunny. The others had their share of demons to quell, no doubt. After a while, Kai poured himself a cup of tea, looked at Sunny, and asked with uncertainty,
What happened? I don't remember much after being swallowed by Severax.
Swallowed what? You were swallowed by the dragon.
Oh, not really. I just sort of jumped into his mouth because I didn't know how else to kill him.
The Effie blinked a few times but didn't say anything. She even forgot about her food for a moment. Sunny looked down, then sighed.
Nothing really happened. I managed to stall the fifth challenger for a while. He fell for my deception because he had assumed that I would not trust anyone with the knives, I think. After you killed the dragon, there was no real reason for him to stay. He left to salvage at least some rewards before the nightmare ended, and I crossed to the Ivory Island.
He grew quiet for a few moments and then added,
When Severus died, one of the two remaining chains that held it in place broke. Then the other one did too. The tower rose into the sky, and as it did, the force holding the islands afloat shifted, creating the crushing. That is how Chained Isles came to be. Hope escaped, and the nightmare ended.
So Lord Noctis fell too?
Yes, he asked me to give him the obsidian knife and broke the last chain himself.
Damn it! I wish we had something stronger to drink in his honor. Some wine, maybe. Noctis, he was a devious, wicked, two-faced lunatic. But he was also great in more than one sense, you know.
She smiled wistfully and then shook her head.
Isn't it strange? Mourning a figment of the spell. They weren't real after all.
Actually, I think that enjoying some tea is what he would have wanted us to do. That was his plan, you know. Win a war against the immortal saints, defy the gods, release the demon of desire from her prison, and then have a cup of tea.
Sunny took a sip and then let out a satisfied sigh.
Let's relax and do exactly that. We deserved this much, at least, don't you think?
Sometime later, Sunny left the house and sat on the porch by himself. His thoughts were in disarray. So much had changed, so much had happened. So much was going to happen in the next few days as well. His life was inevitably going to transform, hopefully for the best. However, there were many obstacles he was going to have to overcome and many decisions he was going to have to make in order to avoid being destroyed by the changes instead. Although Sunny had grown considerably stronger, and obliterating him was not as easy anymore, there were still threats out there that he did not dare to face. He sighed and looked down, murmuring to himself that he was a master. The knowledge rested in his mind, but he was yet to truly comprehend it. Ascended had seemed so distant and glorious to him once. Not quite demigods, but also not mere mortals anymore. But now, he was one of these venerated beings himself. He could feel inhuman power coursing through his veins. That was something he couldn't process that fast. And yet, time waited for no one. Sunny knew that there would be no opportunity to properly get used to his swiftly shifting circumstances. He had a lot to do, and he had to do it now.
Just take it one step at a time.
What did he have to do immediately? Call Aiko for one. He had to let his business partner know that he was back and get an update on how Rain was doing. Then discover a way to contact the White Feather clan and find out about the fallout of the destruction of the Night Temple. Although Cassie could handle that. Finally, get in touch with Master Jet. For better or worse, she was his handler and his point of contact with the government. If things turned from bad to worse with the great clans, the authorities were the only force influential enough to shield him. For a price, no doubt.
Not yet. I need to collect my thoughts first.
He leaned back and studied the familiar, peaceful landscape of the Terrace district. Despite the fact that the great clans possessed incredible powers, it was not too easy to deal with Sunny and the other members of the cohort anymore. All four of them were masters now, and exceptional ones at that. Not only had they conquered the second nightmare, but they had also done it at an abnormally young age, and after entering the seed one measly year after awakening. The survivors of the Forgotten Shore were already famous, and this latest accomplishment was bound to stir up a real storm, both in the media and behind closed doors. Sunny would not be able to remain fully under the radar anymore. Not to mention that each of them received extremely powerful abilities. Effie's was, perhaps, the most remarkable in how useful it was. Sunny had expected the Huntress to receive another combat ability, but instead, her new power appeared to bolster her allies as long as they could see her. It was as though they were receiving a part of her phenomenal, comprehensive physical augmentation. Sunny had experienced that enhancement himself when Effie enthusiastically activated her new ability and had to admit that it was powerful. Not comparable to what the young woman herself could accomplish, but still significant. What was even more amazing, it could be effortlessly shared with any number of people as long as they maintained the line of sight with the Huntress, without an additional cost in essence. That basically meant that any cohort, any force, and even any army could benefit tremendously from having Effie fight in their ranks. Of course, masters usually acted alone. There were simply not enough masters and too much for them to do to form full cohorts of Ascended. However, that did not mean that one could not build supporting teams of awakened or even mundane soldiers around them. Sunny had seen exactly that when Master Jet arrived to contain the gate ahead of the government forces. So, Effie was about to get very, very popular among the great powers of humanity. Kai was in a similar situation, although for different reasons. His ascended ability was strange and a little bit frightening. None of them, not even Kai himself, had the chance to explore the full range of its capabilities. However, the potential of what it could achieve was vast. Basically, Kai's voice acquired a supernatural quality that compelled people who heard it to follow his commands. The result and the consequence depended on how much essence he poured into the compulsion and the target's resistance, as well as some other factors that no one understood. Direct commands were hard to force on people with strong willpower or high resistance to mind attacks. For example, if Kai commanded another ascended to drop their weapon, they would be able to refuse the compulsion. However, their grip might grow weaker, and their attacks might grow slower. The same principle worked the other way around too. The compulsion did not have to be aimed at an enemy. Kai could call upon his allies to fight with more fervor or to hold the ground no matter what. He could invoke any feeling he wanted in large groups of people, or lure them to their deaths like a siren. That ability made him incredibly valuable for those who held power as well. The government propaganda machine especially was going to lose its collective mind over Nightingale and his enchanting voice. And there was more. Kai's aspect had evolved after he had faced and slain the ivory dragon. Instances like that were known to happen, but were also incredibly rare. His awakened aspect was now ascended, which made his previous abilities more potent, and maybe even introduced new facets to them. The archer had no time to explore these changes yet, so his friends had no idea what the evolution entailed. They only knew that their friend had grown stronger, although perhaps in a way that few would notice. And then there was Cassie. Her new ability was perhaps the most obscure and esoteric. The blind girl herself described it as being able to perceive the world from a different perspective. In other words, she could now use someone else, or something else, to substitute her senses. She could smell through someone's nose, feel through someone's touch, and see through someone's eyes. While Cassie herself was still blind, she was able to look upon the world again and see what the recipient of the connection saw. The connection could be established with several mediums at the same time, as long as she had the mental capacity to withstand the flood of input. What was more disturbing was the fact that the medium did not necessarily have to acquiesce to the connection or even be aware of it, although it took much less essence to sustain a connection with a willing recipient. Despite not being too flashy at first glance, that was an insidiously formidable ability. After all, knowledge was the origin of power, and Cassie could potentially become a vortex of it. There were a lot of uses for such an ability. From becoming the connective tissue between the commanders and the soldiers during a large-scale battle, to establishing an invisible and undetectable spy network. Additionally, Cassie's first ability expanded once again, now allowing her to perceive not only attributes and aspect names, but also aspect abilities of other awakened. In short, she would be a boon to any clan, great clan, or branch of the government. However, Sunny knew that the blind girl was dead set on remaining independent and continuing to lead the Fire Keepers. Perhaps she would even get a chance. In light of all these revelations, his own ascended ability, shadow manifestation, seemed to have paled in comparison. But that was just if one did not look closer. Sunny suspected that his new ability was much more versatile, insidious, and powerful than that of the other three. And speaking of that, wasn't it time to get to know it better? For a while, Sunny silently experimented with his new power. Shadow manifestation was an interesting ability, especially when combined with the evolved shadow control. It was deceptively straightforward, but held so much depth that Sunny wasn't sure that he would be able to figure out all of its potential uses in a short span of time. The fundamental function of shadow manifestation was rather simple. It allowed him to turn shadows tangible. But the devil hid in the details. Now that Sunny enjoyed authority over all shadows, and not only his own, he could manipulate their shape and even make them move according to his will. However, that facet of his aspect had its caveats. Not all shadows were the same. Some were young and some were ancient. Some were deep and some were shallow. Most importantly, some belonged to inanimate objects and some belonged to living beings. Although Sunny enjoyed their respect and reverence, that did not mean that all shadows were going to submit to him implicitly. They simply chose to follow his commands due to his status as the master of shadows, as opposed to being forced to do it. That was not new to Sunny. He had already noticed this pattern of behavior when inviting wild shadows to enter the shadow lantern. Most did it of their own free will, but some obstinate ones refused his invitation. Now that the child of shadows attribute had evolved, Only the most ancient and deep of the wild shadows seemed reluctant to answer his call. However, not all shadows were wild. That was a term he decided to use when speaking about those of them that were cast by inanimate objects. If a shadow was cast by a living being and connected to a living soul, no amount of authority Sunny had could compel it to abandon or betray their source. So, shadow control only allowed him to manipulate wild shadows. The deeper and older a shadow was, the more concentration it took to command it. He also experienced more strain when commanding distant shadows. Now that Sunny became an ascended devil, the reach of his control extended to almost 10 kilometers. His shadow sense, however, did not usually extend quite that far. His human mind would have been overloaded if it did. So while Sunny could potentially control shadows that were very far away, he simply had no way of sensing them. Unless they were his own shadows, of course. Or those he perceived through them. And then came the actual shadow manifestation. Unlike shadow control, manifestation required him to expend essence. The shadows would remain tangible as long as he continued to sustain them with essence and return to their natural state if he stopped. This was both a blessing and a curse. For obvious reasons, Sunny would have preferred to keep his essence. However, there was an unexpected and incredible boon to this ability. Due to the fact that the manifested shadows were suffused with his essence, they assumed its property. In other words, all of them were akin to memories of the ascended rank in terms of durability and resilience. In other words, if Sunny shaped a shadow into a blade and manifested it, the blade would be comparable to an ascended memory in terms of both sturdiness and the damage it could do. But he was not only limited to creating weapons. Shadow manifestation offered him an incredible measure of utility. Since shadows were formless by nature, he could shape them into anything he wanted. He could create barriers, bridges, ropes, suits of armor. The only limitations were his imagination and his reservoir of essence. Hell, he could even create a saddle for Nightmare or an entire house. Of course, nothing came without a cost. The more complex and condensed a shape was, the more essence it took to sustain it. Creating a simple shadow tentacle was not too hard, but imbuing it with enough solidity to cut through an enemy like a sword was much more taxing. Manifesting deep and ancient shadows also took a toll, although they were more powerful. And lastly, all the things he made tangible were able to move on their own, as long as their shape allowed it. A sword was not going to fly on its own, but a manifested shadow could move around and grab his enemies. That was not a very efficient form of attack in most cases, however. Each shadow possessed its own level of strength, which was usually not too high. Sunny was far away from being able to rip an awakened tyrant to shreds, for now, and unless he really wanted to. By experimenting a little, he found out that he could enhance the might of the manifested shadows by pouring more essence into them. The more force he wanted to exert above their natural threshold, the more essence he had to burn. That would not have been too powerful in the hands of an average master. But Sunny was a devil. He had vastly more essence than almost any other master had at his disposal. If he really wanted to, he could exert truly monstrous strength through his manifested shadows. Even though that would be grossly inefficient in terms of essence expenditure, he felt very happy to have such an option. Who wouldn't want to rip enemies apart without having to lift a finger, even if there were many easier and smarter ways to kill something? Very few were as cool and as devious. Apart from the wild shadows, Sunny could also manifest his own. In fact, doing so was much easier, allowed him much better control, and demanded much less essence to be used. For a few moments, he imagined summoning Gloomy, Happy, Creepy, and Haughty, arming them with shadow blades and making them fight in his stead, thinking what a sight that would be. However, after thinking for a bit, he decided that this was not a very good idea. There was a very simple reason for that. While tangible shadows could affect the real world, they could be affected in turn. Manifested shadows could damage his enemies, but could also be damaged instead. Since his shadows were deeply connected to his soul, making them vulnerable to physical attacks was a very stupid thing to do. Sunny did not even want to think about what would happen if one of them was destroyed. At most, they would be able to perform simple tasks that did not pose any risk. Overall, Sunny was very happy with his new aspect ability. It was powerful and versatile, providing him with potent means of both attack and defense, as well as incredible utility. What made him especially happy, though, is how perfectly it synergized with the shadow lantern. Shadow manifestation had only one apparent weakness: the fact that he would not always be surrounded by shadows. Without anything to manifest, its worth was almost non-existent, unless he wanted to risk his own shadows, of course. However, that weakness was made moot by the shadow lantern. With its help, Sonny could carry an infinite amount of shadows with him at all times. No matter where he went, he would never be without their assistance. He would never be a master without servants, wherever Sonny went. A swarm of shadows would follow. Sonny remained on the porch for a while longer, thinking about nothing in particular. He wondered about the future and about the past. What had happened to the real Noctis? What had happened to the real Hope? What had really happened to her cursed kingdom? He had seen the corpses and Sevras and Sun Prince in the dream realm. However, Solvin had still been alive. The obsidian and the ivory knives had never been used, hinting that the real events of the liberation of Hope had been both similar and vastly different from how they had transpired in the nightmare. Had Noctis succeeded in his ambition to make a deal with Weaver? Had the demon of fate helped him find a way to break the eternal shackles of hope without using the knives? If so, had the sorcerer, perhaps, survived his mad rebellion? What price had he paid? Of course, Sonny knew that there were no answers to his questions. He was never going to learn the truth. The events he had lived through in the nightmare were too distant and shrouded in too much mystery for him to discover it. As he thought about all these things, a familiar figure suddenly appeared on the crosswalk. A teenage girl with pale skin and black hair was walking back from school, a somber expression on her face. Noticing Sonny, she froze for a second and then suddenly sprinted over. Halfway to the porch, Rain remembered herself and slowed down, awkwardly trying to hide her excitement. She stopped near Sonny, hesitated for a moment, and then hit him on the shoulder with her little fist.
Where the hell have you been? Are you back? You were gone for so long.
Hey Rain, of course I am back, can't you see? As for where I was, I just visited a temple, then I went on a little cruise. Then I visited a couple of towers, spent some time in a theater, befriended a horse, lived in another temple for a while. Finally, I visited a very pretty city and got to know its rulers. Why, did you miss me?
Me? Ha, why would I miss you of all people?
She grew silent, looked down, and then added shyly.
Well, maybe I did miss you. A tiny bit. My new tutor is a very respectable awakened, but he is not at all as fun as you.
And what a pity, I am a master now.
You are a master, as in, an ascended. Wait, what?
Indeed, I am. Do you know what that means?
She hesitated and asked what it meant.
Why, it means that my lessons will be much more expensive, of course.
He laughed, then grew silent, and added after a short pause.
Oh, also, I might have missed you a tiny bit, too.
A dark river flowed through a cavernous expanse of black stone. Fog nestled on the water, stifling its quiet murmurs and veiling everything in white. A lone source of light was traveling through the fog, tearing a path through it. It was a slender gondola cut from onyx, with a glass lantern hanging on its bow. A pristine white flame burned within the lantern, straining against the confines of its crystal prison. The fog opened up before the gondola, and then silently closed behind. A young woman with silver hair and ivory skin was curled into a ball, sleeping on the bottom of the onyx boat. In the stark light of the lantern, her face seemed deathly pale and vulnerable. On the stern of the gondola stood a skeleton dressed in rags. He was working the oar, staring into the fog or at the young woman. Despite the fact that the skeleton had no lungs, no lips, and no tongue, he was humming a song. One day the gods will fall and reveal their lie. The one who sleeps will awaken to devour his children. Oh, and us all. That which was forgotten will be remembered and consume the world. Oh, all of us will dream the nightmare of the forgotten god. As he sang, the young woman stirred and then slowly opened her eyes. The skeleton grew silent, glanced at her, then said,
Good morning, creature. How have you slept?
She sat up straight and did not answer, staring at the skeleton with tired gray eyes. The boatman waited for a bit, then shrugged.
Feeling well, you have not been speaking much these past few weeks, creature. Has your mind finally gone?
The young woman remained silent, making the skeleton uncomfortable. He shook his head.
Something about you feels different today. Your shadow, it seems to have grown deeper. How peculiar.
There was no answer. They continued to sail in silence for a while. Slowly, the fog receded, revealing a black shore. The skeleton changed the course of the boat and let it drift until its bottom scraped against the rock. There, he let go of the oar and sighed.
This is it, creature. That is as far as I go.
The young woman remained motionless for a while, then stood up and touched the lantern, letting the white flame travel from it to her palm. After that, she jumped onto the shore, staggered, and slowly straightened herself, looking into the darkness. Finally, she spoke.
How close are we to that place?
Close enough, I'd wager. Sorry for lying to you, by the way. In my defense, you only have yourself to blame, creature. Who would be foolish enough to believe that anyone can cross the underworld? This place is not the likes of us to traverse. Getting this close to its inner border is already a miracle.
He hesitated for a while, then added.
Are you sure that you want to go on? There are worse fates than death, creature. Trust me, I should know.
What about you? What will you do?
Oh, I don't know. Now that I've been taken off that damn tree, there's not much time left for me to exist. Maybe I'll try to find what remains of the Shadow Realm to have a proper death. Maybe I'll just go back and tease Azarax for a while one last time. That fellow was really insufferable, you know. Spending an eternity in his company was the greatest punishment of all. A piece of advice: choose your eternal companions carefully, creature.
The young woman lingered for a few moments, then nodded and walked into the darkness. Her steps were steady. Then, without turning her head, she said farewell and thanked Yuri's.
Foolish abomination. Still, I wish her luck. Even though I don't know what she seeks, I hope she finds it.
As the young woman walked further and further away, the light of her flame grew distant and dim. The darkness surrounded the skeleton, and the white fog flowed slowly in his direction, as if wishing to consume him. Yuri's watched the fog draw closer, and then sighed again.
She is not as foolish as me, at least.
Then the white mist swallowed him, and his voice abruptly fell quiet. Soon, impenetrable darkness reigned the cold river once again. And far in the distance, a lonely spark of light continued to climb higher and higher, soon disappearing from view. End of Volume 4, Chain Breaker. In one of the fortified lecture halls of the Awakened Academy, a large auditorium was slowly filling up with students. These young men and women, however, did not look like inexperienced sleepers. Instead, most of them possessed the grim confidence of battle-tested veterans. They were sharp and rough around the edges, exhibiting the telltale signs of those who had just recently returned from the dream realm. For the same reason. The crowd of students was suffused with a sense of energy and liveliness typical to people who had recently brushed with death, but managed to escape its clutches alive. These were the newly awakened. Several weeks after the winter solstice, most of those who were destined to survive had already found their way to a human citadel and returned to the waking world. Now, they were settling into their new lives and responsibilities, while some chose to forge their own path. Many decided to remain in the academy for a while longer. Its curriculum was not only aimed at sleepers, after all. A larger part of the complex was dedicated to continuous training of the awakened students. Just because one had survived the crucible of their first venture into the dream realm did not mean that they could stop learning after all. In fact, faced with its many challenges, most of the survivors learned one crucial lesson: no matter how prepared they were. That was never enough. Granted, the lecture that these particular young awakened were about to listen to was not from a popular course. titled Resource Management During Prolonged Expeditions and Intercitadel Travel. The course had nothing to do with battle training or aspect proficiency. As such, it was rather obscure and unpopular. The large crowd of students had more to do with the identity of the lecturer as opposed to the theme of the course. As an actual ascended, and a person of wide renown, this star lecturer presented an irresistible attraction to the awakened students. Who was better to teach them than a person who had braved the dangers of the dream realm and slain countless nightmare creatures with their own 2 hands? As the time of the lecture approached, the students settled on the seats in the auditorium and waited for the lecturer to arrive. One of the last to come in was a young man in stylish civilian clothes. They were predominantly black with subdued gray accents. The young man glanced at the young awakened, then proceeded to walk to the center of the auditorium. A few people looked at him in confusion, instead of joining his fellow students. The young man walked to the teacher's desk and outstretched one hand. To everyone's bewilderment, he was summoning a memory. Stranger still, that memory turned out to be in the shape of an exquisite wooden chair. The strange guy put it down, then took a seat behind the desk and looked at them as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Several awakened opened their mouths to condemn his childish antics, but then hesitated. Although the eccentric student was bound to anger the lecturer with his disrespectful behavior, there was something about him that demanded attention. Another reason for their hesitation was that he was incredibly attractive. The young man was not very tall, but his slender build and stylish attire made him look very charming. With his porcelain skin and raven black hair, he looked like an exquisite doll. His striking dark eyes seemed to glint with good-natured humor. At the same time, there was something cold about them that made those who looked at the young man for too long shiver. It was as though shadows grew a little deeper around him. After a few moments, one of the young women in the first row cleared her throat and said in a friendly tone, telling him he had better move before Master Sunless arrived and offering the free seat right next to her. The young man looked at her and smiled pleasantly. At the same time, the girl next to her whispered furiously, hissing that this was Master Sunless and calling her an idiot. A wave of whispers ran through the auditorium as students reacted in disbelief, marveling that he was their aide. That it had taken him less than 2 years to ascend, and that he looked nothing like the actor who had played him in the Song of Light and Darkness. "Hey, you better move before Master Sunless arrives. Here, there is a free seat, right next to me." "What are you doing? This is Master Sunless, you idiot." "What? This is Master Sunless." "But he's our age." "Of course he's our age. It took him less than 2 years to ascend. Why do you think he is famous?" "He's not at all like the actor who played him in the Song of Light and Darkness. The casting director must be crazy."
Good morning, awakened. I am Ascended Sunless. You can call me Master Sunless or simply Master. Welcome to the first lecture of the Resource Management During Prolonged Expeditions and Intercitadel Travel course. As some of you might know, I have a tiny amount of experience with that.
A few polite chuckles resounded from the audience, making him wince internally, and he muttered under his breath about it being a tough crowd.
We will explore various topics in the course of these lectures, but first, let me ask you a question.
He looked at his students and smiled.
What was the biggest threat to your life in the dream realm?
Overall, the lecture went better than Sunny had expected. If not for the fact that many female students had stared at him a bit too intensely, for some reason, he would have been completely comfortable teaching these young awakened. After all, he was basing the lessons on his own experience, and the students, while not as battle-hardened as him, were not amateurs themselves. Each of them had survived the first nightmare and a journey to the dream realm. So, the lecture was more of an exchange of knowledge between professionals than a traditional lesson. It was even refreshing, compared to his tutoring sessions with Rain. Although his sister was incredibly talented and hard-working, not to mention nice to be around, there were many things he simply couldn't explain to her with words. With a sigh, Sunny turned off the projector and looked at the empty auditorium. Was this his life now? 6 months had passed since the cohort returned from the second nightmare. During this time, many things happened. He had celebrated his 20th birthday just a few weeks ago. Some of the changes were good and some were bad. On the bright side, he got to spend a lot of time with Rain, teaching her how to protect herself and slowly growing closer to her. Sunny had been careful not to appear too friendly, though. He still did not want anyone, including the girl herself, to know that they were siblings. He had also spent a lot of time talking to Aiko and trying to turn the brilliant emporium into a small but thriving business. However, there was one big problem that loomed over everything he did. Ever since returning from the nightmare, Sunny was not able to enter the dream realm again. He had spent all 6 months in the safety of the waking world. And the reason for that was the strange situation he had found himself in with Clan Valor. While Saint Tyrus had done everything in her power to shield Sunny and Cassie from the wrath of the Great Clan, her influence was not unlimited. The White Feather Clan itself got into hot water with their overlords. From what Sunny learned, they were dismissed from ruling the Chained Island and burdened with another duty. What that duty was, he did not know. Both Cassie and he would have fared poorly if they remained awakened. However, their ascension changed things substantially and gave them more room to bargain. If before the great clans would have been inclined to make them disappear, now they were more careful in their approach, which did not mean that everything was fine. The issue was too nuanced and sensitive to be solved quickly. So, the preparations for the negotiations took a lot of time. For the time being, both of them had to protect themselves. Things were much worse for Cassie, who seemed more complicit in Mordret's escape. After all, she had requested to be stationed in the Night Temple, only to leave after a while and return, causing the disaster. Since no one except for Saint Tyrus knew about Sunny's clash with Mirror Beast, it was easy to believe that Cassie had come in contact with the imprisoned prince during her stay in the Citadel, and then orchestrated his escape, or that she had this goal in mind from the very beginning. As the result, things turned a bit ugly for the Fire Keepers. After a couple of them disappeared, the rest took shelter in the Ebony and Ivory Towers, where the ocean of divine flames and the crushing protected them from any threat. They rarely returned to the waking world to avoid problems. Sunny was on the opposite side of things. Thanks to Master Jet, he enjoyed a bit of protection from the government. Since the great clans had a lot of influence in the dream realm, but were not as powerful in the waking world, he was advised to remain there for a while, which meant that he could enjoy some peace and quiet for a bit. It also meant that he could not hunt the nightmare creatures and saturate his cores unless a gate suddenly opened nearby. This was a problem. After the seed of nightmare had been destroyed, something unexpected happened. A gateway took its place, turning the Ivory Tower into a citadel. At the same time, the dream realm anchors of the cohort members shifted, becoming tied to it. Masters did not have to travel to another world every time they slept, but they still needed a gateway to return to reality. Changing an anchor was as easy as making use of another gateway, but there lay the problem. The only way to leave their new citadel was to either brave the crushing somehow, or to go through the portal to the Ebony Tower and rise from the depths of the sky below on the flying ship. While that made the Ivory Tower incredibly safe, it also meant that there were no nightmare creatures around for them to hunt. There was no point for Sunny to go to the dream realm at all, especially after he had explored Hope's former prison, finding nothing of particular interest inside. It also meant that Mordret was most likely tied to the same gateway. However, the Prince of Nothing had never shown himself. Either he had found a way to change his anchor, or he had chosen to remain in the waking world as well. In any case, there was no safe way for Sunny to collect shadow fragments in the dream realm. He was also cut from his main source of memories, which he had hoped to put on sale through the Emporium. At first, Sunny was very unhappy with this situation. He was both much stronger and still far behind Nephi's in terms of raw power. Even though there was a vast gap of 2 ranks between them now, his soul lusted to grow even more. He could never have enough strength, never be powerful enough to protect himself and those he cared about from the vicissitudes of life. He was still too weak to challenge fate. But after a few days of peaceful life in the waking world, Sunny had started to slowly change his mind. In the past 3 years, his power had grown tremendously, and at a breakneck pace. While that was extremely beneficial overall, there was a negative side to such speed. His foundation had turned unstable. He had been so preoccupied with gaining more power, more strength, deeper insight, greater understanding, that he had not spent enough time actually assimilating all these gains into a coherent whole. Internalizing and absorbing all the lessons he had learned into his very bones was very important. Yet he had neglected it for the lack of time and opportunity. He needed time to truly make the vast power he had won his own. Additionally, there was something else that concerned Sonny, his mental state. Ever since he had been infected by the nightmare spell at 16, his psyche had been subjected, sometimes by the circumstances and sometimes through his own volition, to incredible abuse. Sonny prided himself on the fact that he never broke. No matter what ghastly horror and gruesome agony he had to endure, and there had been plenty. However, he also never forgot the conversation he had with Master Jet on the way to Shadow Blade Kurt's execution. He knew that awakened, no matter how great and powerful they seemed, were also the most likely to crack. The nightmares they brought back from the dream realm haunted them, and many succumbed to the relentless strain. Sonny had been gutted, beheaded, and burned. He had watched friends die or be left behind. The amount of torturous pain he had gone through could only compare to the amount of mental anguish he had experienced. The Red Colosseum, the nightmares, and all the rest. It was enough to crush a dozen people. And yet, he still stood tall, but for how long? While Sonny considered himself to be a resilient person, maybe even incredibly so, he was not prideful enough to think that he was better than every other human out there. Would his soul and mind continue to remain strong if he continued to carelessly abuse them, or would small cracks appear on their surfaces? Maybe there were countless cracks on them already. In the end, he had decided that taking a break to consolidate his foundation and give his mind time to heal was worth it. The situation with Clan Valor, while unpleasant, was not critical. It just demanded time and caution. Slowly but surely, the sides were going to come to an understanding and find a compromise through negotiations. As masters of considerable renown, Sonny and Cassie had enough influence and weight to reach a favorable outcome in these negotiations, especially because 50 of the most promising awakened of their generation were following Song of the Fallen. He was going to use the time before that happened to his benefit. So, although the past 6 months had not exactly been exciting for Sonny, they had been very fruitful. He had spent a lot of time practicing his combat skills and shadow dance, properly assimilating everything that he had learned to elevate his mastery of battle to a new level. He also had to relearn a lot of things to adjust to his new power as a master, and adjust all his techniques to this new incredible reality. One of the more valuable discoveries he made during this time was that the inherent problem he had been struggling with, the threat of losing himself to the formlessness of shadow dance, was easily remedied by a simple thought exercise. He just had to remember his true name. No matter how far gone he was, it always brought him back. Apart from that, every single aspect of Sonny's combat ability was vastly improved by his newly profound control of shadow essence, as well as the time he had taken to fully absorb all of his rich battle experience. Battle techniques were not the only thing he trained, though. He also dove deep into the intricacies of shadow manifestation, first learning how to properly wield it, and then leveraging his cunning and creativity to push its uses to their limits. His new ability was an incredibly versatile one, so there was a lot he could do with it. Not only did it have the potential to be powerful on its own, it could also be weaved into every other facet of his battle performance in unexpected and insidious ways. Almost every day, Sonny discovered something new he could do. The possibilities were simply limitless. That limitlessness, however, was its own problem. Just because Sonny could do a lot did not mean that it was wise to do it. So, it took a lot of time to find the most effective and efficient ways to use shadow manifestation. Slowly but surely, his arsenal of true and tested tricks and methods grew. He practiced each one until they became as instinctive as his combat techniques, so that he could use them without wasting even a split second on thinking about and concentrating on the desired result. Lastly, there was sorcery. After the initial breakthrough he had made in the nightmare, Sunny spent a lot of time widening the scope of his understanding of spellweave. This was perhaps the most unassailable and tough field of expertise he was trying to study, since there was nothing and no one to teach him how to do it. The scope and complexity of the subject were boundless, and all he could do was blindly stumble in the darkness, learning tiny bits through trial and error. It did not help that he could only experiment with memories, which were a rare and finite resource to him. Sunny worked around that limitation, somewhat, by turning mundane things into memories and experimenting on them instead. However, that produced its own obstacle. He needed soul shards to do so, and soul shards were very expensive in the real world, and he could not procure them in the dream realm for now. To solve his resource problem, Sunny turned to the only source available to him, the merit points provided by the government, which could then be exchanged for various valuable things. To get points and fund his research, he had compiled another paper with the help of teacher Julius. The exploration report on Chained Isles by Ascended Sunless did not produce as big of a ripple among the general public, but caused a real explosion in the awakened academia. The data about all the ancient nightmare creatures, the culture, and the bizarre nature of the Kingdom of Hope was a true boon to the collective knowledge base of humanity. Sunny, of course, kept the most sensitive pieces of information to himself, but just what remained brought him vastly more contribution points than the report on the Forgotten Shore. Information from nightmares was 10 times more valuable after all, since very few people ever challenged them, and even fewer returned alive. These contribution points, as well as other benefits and privileges he had become entitled to as a master, allowed him to not only pour his mind and soul into studying sorcery, but also kept the brilliant emporium functioning without a constant influx of his hunting trophies. Sadly, even that was not enough, and hence Sunny found himself teaching young awakened at the academy. While that was not the best and most efficient way for a master to earn, was still rather profitable for someone in his situation. Sitting in the empty auditorium, Sunny sighed and looked at his communicator. A pale smile appeared on his face, and he murmured to himself that she must already be here. Today was a special day for more than one reason. A few days prior, Master Jet had suddenly contacted him. This was not too strange since they interacted often in these past 6 months. But this time, something about Soul Reaper's voice sounded a bit off. Not exactly bad, just different. She had told him that she had some good news and some bad news, and requested a face-to-face meeting to discuss an important issue. That meeting was about to take place at the instructor's cafeteria. Shaking his head, Sunny stood up, dismissed his chair, and walked to the door.
I wonder what Master Jet has to say. Gods, was there really a need for all this mystery? She made it sound as if the world is ending.
Now that Sunny was a teacher at the academy, he was very much looking forward to gaining access to the instructor's cafeteria. He remembered the last time he had eaten there in perfect detail. The food was simply to die for. It might have been one of the major reasons why he had accepted the job of a lecturer, to be honest.
No, it wasn't. I am not that shallow.
Walking inside, Sunny glanced at the tasteful interior, gaining a new appreciation for the wooden furnishings. By now, he was not shocked every time he saw natural wood in the waking world. However, this was not just any wood. If he remembered correctly, all this lumber came from the corpse of a slain titan. A titan killed by the great clan Valor, to be precise. Perhaps even by Anvil himself. What irony it was. To enjoy a dinner on one of the cafeteria's tables while being secretly hunted by the people who provided the titanic lumber for its creation. With a sigh, Sunny looked around and noticed a familiar face. An exquisitely beautiful woman in a deep blue uniform sat in the corner of the cafeteria, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. He confidently walked over and sat down across from her. Sunny said,
Master Jet.
Soul Reaper Jet looked up from her cup and smiled at him. Jet replied,
Master Sunless.
Well, that sounds weird.
He shifted uncomfortably, not accustomed to being addressed that way, at least not by her. Although the two of them were technically of the same rank now, Jet was still older than him. The gap between them had grown much smaller, but he still felt a lot of respect for her. Looking at his fellow Ascended, Sunny suddenly frowned. Master Jet looked different today. He was accustomed to her usual, slightly unkempt and careless appearance. However, the person in front of him looked like nothing if not an exemplary officer. Her uniform was perfectly ironed and buttoned all the way, with not a single crease or blemish marring its surface. Her silver epaulets were glistening with a polished sheen. Her leather boots were freshly shined. Her raven black hair was perfectly arranged, and her icy blue eyes were sharp and piercing. He raised an eyebrow. Sunny ventured, "You look nice." Jet's smile widened.
Oh, I had to attend a special ceremony in the morning. Promotions are flying off the shelves in the government these days.
Sunny cleared his throat. Sunny muttered,
Congratulations, I guess.
Soul Reaper laughed, then pushed a small alloy box toward him.
No, congratulations to you. Happy belated birthday.
He blinked a couple of times, then opened the box and looked at the glimmering soul shard that lay inside. His eyes sparked when he recognized its Ascended rank.
Ah, this is exactly what I needed. Thank you so much, but isn't it too luxurious?
A shard like that cost a lot. Master Jet shrugged.
Perks of being a public servant. I have more access to such things than most.
She grew silent and looked at him expectantly. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the Ascended beauty sighed.
What no present for me. I recently turned 30, you know.
Sunny froze, then chuckled awkwardly. Sunny offered.
Oh, well, in that case, dinner is on me.
Soul Reaper seemed more than happy with that arrangement.
Ah, you know me too well, Sunny. In that case, don't mind if I do.
Sometime later, they finished their food and leaned back on their seats in satisfaction. Master Jet took a sip of coffee and smiled.
Credit where credit is due. You Academy people really know how to treat your staff. I am regretting my choice of career a little.
Her voice trailed off a little, and a wistful expression appeared on her face. Then she shook her head and finally addressed the true reason why they met today.
Good news first. You can relax, Sunny. Valor seems to finally be ready to behave reasonably, so the worst part is over.
He inhaled deeply. Sunny exclaimed.
At last, what changed?
Master Jet shrugged.
Well, a lot of things, but mainly, they just don't have the energy to pursue small matters anymore. The tension between the great clans seems to be growing, so Valor elders have a lot on their plate. That plays in your favor because you and your cohort have managed to make yourself valuable. With Saint Tyrus advocating on your behalf, everything is ready for a sincere and friendly negotiation.
Sunny frowned.
Sincere, friendly, what about the fire keepers that disappeared? You might have not noticed, but the survivors of the Forgotten Shore are a tight group. To them, this is not a small matter.
She smiled.
They are alive, although maybe not well. Their release is one of the points you and Song of the Fallen will have to negotiate. However, I don't foresee any problems with that. As long as you told the truth and neither of you had conscious plans of assisting that mysterious prisoner of theirs in the escape, everything should be fine.
A dark expression appeared on Sunny's face. Master Jet knew the general situation, but not the details. The problem they had with the great clan Valor was very simple. Although Sunny and Cassie had caused a great deal of harm to the clan's interests, because of the lack of witnesses and Saint Tyrus volunteering to act as the scapegoat, that by itself was not something intolerable. However, the crux of the matter was that no one in the great clan knew if their actions had been simply the result of a misfortunate happenstance or premeditated. What Master Jet had just told him meant that Valor was ready to abandon their hostile paranoia and accept the version of events where neither Sunny nor Cassie had helped Mordret escape willingly, as well as grant them an unofficial pardon, with the White Feather clan taking the responsibility for the death of Saint Cormac. That would leave them in the clear. However, although the great clan knew that Mordret had escaped as the result of their actions, no one except for the members of the cohort knew that he had followed them into the nightmare. if the fact that the 5 of them had become masters together ever came into the light. Then, no matter what the truth was, no one would believe that the bastard simply manipulated them all. They would all think that Sunny and Cassie were his willing allies, so this secret had to remain buried forever. Sunny grimaced. Sunny asked.
So what do they want?
Master Jet shrugged.
I can't say, really, but you have to be ready to make some concessions. Valor will probably insist on recruiting you to their side, at least in some capacity. Whether you manage to resist their forceful invitation or not depends on you.
She thought for a bit and then added.
What works in your favor is that you, Song of the Fallen Nightingale, and Raised by Wolves are a package deal, as far as everyone is concerned. Valor might have ambitions of making all of you their asset, but they will probably be satisfied by ensuring that none of you becomes entangled with their opponents. Recruiting just one would make it so that the rest would not join the opposite side.
A deep scowl appeared on Sunny's face.
Are you telling me that we will have to sell one of us to Clan Valor?
Master Jet smiled.
You make it sound as if becoming a member of a great clan is something horrible. Most awakened would kill for such a chance, you know. Granted, you will never be treated as a true-blood descendant, but that does not mean that they won't shower you with resources and opportunities. Probably.
Sunny remained silent for a while, then sighed. Sunny conceded.
I know, but I need to think about it.
She took a sip of coffee, then leaned back.
Well, think fast.
He looked at the beautiful Ascended with a dark expression and asked in a low tone. Sunny asked.
Then why is that?
Master Jet grinned.
Well, because the representative of Valor will be here tomorrow. Your friend Cassie is coming back to the waking world, too. You will meet here in the academy as its neutral ground. So, you have until tomorrow morning to prepare for the negotiations, Sunny. Good luck.
Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then scowled. Sunny demanded.
What do you mean, good luck? Aren't you going to be there to mediate the negotiations?
Master Jet took a sip of her coffee, then shook her head.
No, while the government often serves as a neutral party and the connective tissue between the great clans, this is not one of those cases. Besides, I simply can't. I am being transferred out of the city. This is my last day here for a while.
He stared at her, dumbfounded. Master Jet was not going to be around anymore. Sunny suddenly felt a pang of discomfort. He had grown accustomed to her being present out there somewhere, not exactly close to him, but at the same time within reach. Noticing the expression on his face, she sighed.
Actually, that is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about, the bad news.
Soul Reaper casually looked around, then summoned a memory that looked like a music box. Immediately, a dome of silence appeared around them, cutting off all outside noises. Sunny frowned, confused by the need for secrecy. She had seemed to be perfectly fine discussing private matters of a great clan in the public. What could have been more sensitive than that? Master Jet lingered for a moment, then said,
To be honest, Sunny, I was not going to have this conversation with you, at least not yet. But since the situation changed, and the things we are going to talk about can affect the decisions you will make tomorrow, I decided that there is no point in postponing it.
He shifted uncomfortably. Sunny remarked,
That is very suspenseful. What is the matter?
She smiled, then activated her communicator and summoned a projection. It showed a map of something that looked like a big chunk of the dream realm. Sunny saw a lot of water and several large landmasses, each no smaller than the forgotten shore by the looks of it. However, no matter how he looked, he could not find the familiar landmarks. The hollow mountains, Bastion, Ravenheart. Either he was not as proficient at reading maps as he had thought, or he had never seen this land. Slightly confused, he glanced at Master Jet and asked. Sunny asked,
Is that a previously unexplored region of the dream realm?
She looked at him with a strange expression, then coughed. Jet replied,
No, that is planet Earth, you dummy.
Sunny froze in embarrassment, then looked at the image again. Sunny muttered,
So right, I am an idiot.
Soul Reaper grinned.
Sonny, are you one of those awakened that know more about the dream realm than about the waking world?
He cleared his throat. Sonny offered.
It's not like I spent a lot of time in school, you know.
Her grin dimmed a little.
Right, sorry. Sometimes I forget how young you are. It took me a while to cover the basics after leaving the outskirts as well.
Master Jet sighed, then pointed to the map.
In any case, this is our world. As you can see, it is not in great shape. A few centuries ago, it looked very different. There were around 12 billion people living across it. A few million even found their way to the moon eventually.
She sighed, then added.
But now there's barely 3 billion of us left, and we only populate 4 of the 7 continents. Do you know which continent we are currently on? What our city is called?
Sonny looked at her with a dark expression. Sonny replied.
I am not a complete fool, you know. We are in Asia, and the city is called, wait, it has a name. I just thought it's called the city.
She rolled her eyes.
Well, you are half right. We are indeed in Asia, which is one of the 4 populated continents and one that shelters the most people. The city we live in is the largest and most populous city left on Earth. It is also the industrial, military, and administrative heart of humanity. Around 1/10 of all humans live here. That is why, while it is technically called the Northern Quadrant Siege Capital, people usually just refer to it as the city.
Master Jet hesitated for a moment, then said with a hint of darkness in her voice.
Most of the surface of the planet is either uninhabitable or overrun by nightmare creatures, so megacities are the most convenient way to sustain a large population. However, even with spell tech and modern science, they are not capable of sustaining everyone. Hence the outskirts, where around 20% of the total city population is offloaded to slowly die out of the sight of the rest of humanity. But that is neither here nor there.
She sighed and then pointed to a continent directly connected to Asia.
This pit of desolation used to be known as Europe. It was turned completely unsuited for human life long before the spell appeared.
Her finger trailed across a large body of water.
This is North America. We lost it not long before you were born when a Category 5 gate opened there. That was a big disaster. Because of its proximity to the gate, South America was mostly abandoned as well. Now, we only maintain a small presence in its southernmost part. Those settlements are incredibly important, however, because that is where most of our food is produced.
Master Jet hesitated for a bit, and then gestured to a large archipelago situated below South America.
This is Antarctica, the second most populated continent after Asia and the logistical link between the rest of the continents, connecting both hemispheres together. Believe it or not, before the dark times it was covered in ice. Actually, the melting of all that ice was one of the reasons that caused the dark times.
She sighed.
The sea levels across the planet rose, drowning many cities and displacing billions of people. The percentage of the landmass that was devoured by water was not too radical, but the problem was that many civilization centers were situated along the coasts. With all of them gone, and billions of refugees seeking shelter, the global infrastructure collapsed. It did not happen in an instant, of course, but quite fast. That is the danger of building a deeply interconnected society. Lack of self-sufficiency is perfectly fine and even beneficial during the good times, but makes civilizations vulnerable to cascade failure.
Soul Reaper looked at him with a grim expression.
Which was exactly what happened. The worse things got, the more chaos there was, and the more chaos there was, the worse things got. Endless natural disasters, destruction of global infrastructure, and resource starvation led to an escalating series of wars. Orbital kinetic strikes, nuclear warfare, chemical warfare, biowarfare. In the end, everything was being used. The planet was already in bad shape, and this was almost the last straw. In the end, the terribly reduced population achieved some form of stability, and that was the nightmare spell appeared.
Master Jet shook her head.
But am I getting off topic? The point is almost all of humanity resides around the Indian Ocean today. Asia, Antarctica, Africa, and Australia are the four remaining bastions of our civilization, forming the northern, southern, western, and eastern quadrants.
Sonny listened to the impromptu lecture with interest. He knew bits and pieces of human history, of course, but mostly from them being referenced in popular culture and government propaganda, which were more often than not one and the same. Out there in the outskirts, people did not need to know a lot about the world because their world started and ended in the outskirts. Even the city proper seemed like a distant land. He would have had more general knowledge, of course, if he had attended school, but Sonny's formal education more or less ended when he was 7. Honestly, the fact that he knew that people lived on the outside of the planet as opposed to on the inside was already an achievement. He had managed to become a teacher despite all that, had he not? Still, I probably should start educating myself on matters not having to do with the nightmare spell now that I have the chance. There are plenty of people as ignorant as me, of course, but still, this is kind of embarrassing. Sonny looked at Jet and shifted slightly. Sonny said,
Thanks for the history lesson, Master Jet, but what does it have to do with anything?
She leaned back, smiled calmly, and answered in a relaxed tone.
Oh, it's very simple, really. These four bastions of humanity I mentioned, they're about to become 3.
Master Jet's nonchalant attitude was in stark contrast with the gravity of her statement. Sonny froze for a few moments, then slowly put his cup on the table. When he spoke, his voice sounded a little hoarse. Sonny breathed.
What?
She sighed, then looked around the cafeteria. It was slightly surreal to be discussing something that concerned the lives of hundreds of millions of people in the safety of this tranquil place. Several instructors were enjoying their meals, and there were members of the staff going about their business. None of them knew of the approaching disaster. This contradiction was chilling, too. Soul Reaper did not seem to mind.
I have told you about the Obel scale once, right? It is a very complicated spell-tech system that the government uses to predict the appearance of gates across the globe. Well, I was not entirely honest when I said that a bit of maintenance and calibration would solve all the problems it had been experiencing recently. In truth, the problems we've been having with its readings are not as trivial as I implied. They are just a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Sonny's eyes widened slightly. Sonny muttered.
Kurt, Shadowblade Kurt, he mentioned something about the Obel scale. It was the reason he had given up and gone mad, one of them at least.
Master Jet nodded, an expression of mild contempt appearing on her face.
Yes, however, Kurt was broken and weak. He really blew the issue out of proportion.
The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. Sonny retorted.
I wouldn't call losing an entire continent a small issue.
She shrugged.
Neither would I, but is not the end of the world, either.
Soul Reaper calmly took a sip of coffee.
Back when we lost North America, something similar happened. The Obel scale went out of alignment, making its detection scope unreliable. In the end, a Category 5 gate appeared, and after that, everything went back to normal. However, a few years ago the government noticed growing irregularities in the readings again. After studying these irregularities for some time, we came to the conclusion that something massive was going to happen again.
She pursed her lips.
This time it is going to be different. Instead of one gargantuan gate, there is going to be a chain reaction of sorts. Hundreds of smaller gates are going to open in relatively quick succession, allowing countless nightmare creatures to invade the real world, and all that is going to take place.
A moment of tense silence passed before she finished the sentence.
In Antarctica.
Sonny felt his mouth turn dry. Sonny said,
But you just said that Antarctica is the second most populated continent on Earth.
Master Jet nodded.
Yes, there are around 900 million people living there.
He remained motionless for a while, then looked away. Sonny observed. You also said that a compartmentalized global infrastructure is vulnerable to cascade failure, and that Antarctica serves as a logistical hub between the 4 continents and South America, where most of our food is produced. Soul Reaper smiled.
Indeed, however, it is not as bad as you might think. Every megacity possesses robust hydroponic agriculture and is capable of sustaining itself to a large degree. We've learned our lessons. Yes, losing the connection to South America will be a painful blow, but humanity will survive. There will be a big change, of course. I think you have already guessed its nature. More people will be pushed out into the outskirts. Maybe there will be 30% of the population living there instead of 20, maybe more.
Sonny still could not let go of his dismay. Sonny demanded.
What about the millions of people living in Antarctica? What is the government doing? Can't you throw enough troops and awaken there to contain the chain reaction?
She hesitated for a few moments, then let out a wistful sigh.
Sure, if we mobilize all our forces, and I mean all of them, and get the great clans to fully support the operation, we might keep hold of Antarctica. However, it is not that simple. Everything has a cost, Sonny. There are 3 other continents we have to protect, and sending so much awakened into the meat grinder will leave them defenseless. After all, the fact that hundreds of gates will open in Antarctica does not mean that they will stop appearing everywhere else. Overextending our resources to protect one quadrant will doom all of them. Even if that doesn't happen immediately, in the long term, humanity will cease to exist on Earth.
Master Jet rubbed her face, then smiled.
That does not mean that we are going to remain idle, however. In fact, the government has been preparing a massive operation for the past 2 years. It's just that. The situation changed much quicker than anyone could have expected. The timetable has been brought forward by several years, at least. Our current preparations are entirely insufficient.
She grew silent, then added in a neutral tone.
We thought that there would be much more time to get everything ready, but there isn't, not anymore. So, it's going to be a damn mess of epic proportions.
Sonny scowled, not entirely sure what that was supposed to mean. He could barely accept the fact that losing one of the 4 continents was an acceptable price for keeping the other 3 intact. Humanity had already lost North America, after all, and persisted despite the loss. It had arguably grown more powerful as the result. But if the government was willing to let nightmare creatures conquer Antarctica, what operation could it be possibly planning? Sonny asked.
What exactly is the government going to do?
Master Jet turned back to the map of the Earth, lingered for a few moments, and then pointed at the large archipelago in the south.
Why, what else? We are going to evacuate 900 million people from the doomed continent while a never-ending horde of nightmare creatures is pursuing us. Or, we will try, at least. To be honest, I think that most of those who try will probably die.